Hi, I'm David Goforth with Cooperative Extension Successful Gardener. I find vegetable gardening a lot of fun, and so today I want to show you a little bit about how to get started. Perhaps you'd like to have a vegetable garden in your own yard. Let's take a look at this small site first. This first garden that I want to show you here is probably the most practical for small areas and the most practical for a lot of you around residential areas. And basically all you need is a shovel on this one. And I do this garden right here. It's right beside my compost pile. In fact, sometimes I take my compost pile it out here while I'm getting compost out and then bring it back. But compost pile has been in here, so the soil is very rich and well prepared right here. But you can use the same technique on any spot that you would pick. You typically want to pick a spot where you've got full sun. Full sun's better. I don't have any trees close by where I get the root system in here, and I don't have any real bad weeds in this area. So this is where I would start a garden. And just start, all you have to do is start turning it over, and you really don't need to dig but just one layer deep. Sometimes they'll do what they call double digging, but generally you could just do it one layer, a single digging like this, and you could break up the soil well enough till you could get something planted. Got a rock there. I actually had this in last year. I started off with lettuce and then come in with squash after the lettuce. In fact, there's an old squash vine right there. And then after the squash, I actually had the late season was tomatoes, which we picked tomatoes here before we went into the frost. And this past year, where it was very dry, it worked very well to have tomatoes here because this extra organic matter and the compost pile kept them watered a little bit better, where I didn't have to water them quite near as much. And they were able to hold water a lot better. But basically, you'll dig an area like this, and this soil here, in this case, is ready to go. In your case, you may need to add lime to it, and you may need to add fertilizer. Particularly if you don't have that much compost, you can lime and fertilize it, and you should be able to do that. I've actually managed to do, at times I've had gardens this wide and close to 50 foot long that I've just dug with hand tools like we've dug right here. And again, the soil that's been dug the first time with a lot less organic matter will be a lot harder to do than what I'm showing you here. But the technique is just simply the same, is breaking it, turn it over like that right there. If you've got a little bit larger scale, let me show you another technique that you might use on a little bit larger garden. For weed control in a garden like this, you can use hand pulling is a good technique, or sometimes if you get a little bit larger garden, you might go with a hoe or something like this. And just a simple, like these weeds right here, simple work like that through them would be enough to take care of them. A lot of times when people want a hoe, they want, like if I was doing this patch of weeds right here, some people want to start right there and come this way, and that's a lot harder to do. If you'll start on this side and work here, you're not working over yourself. Just a little technique for people that had never run one of these hoes before, going in that direction. So that's all the weed control that you would really need for a small area like this. Let's take a look at a little bit larger area. This area right here, I'm going to use a little bit different technique. It's a little bit bigger area, so I was able to get some equipment in here and move it. You might be able to either hire somebody to break up the area at the beginning of the year, or you might be able to rent a rototiller and break it up at the beginning of the year. But you break it up one time, and then you can manage it the rest of the time yourself with nothing more than hand tools. What I did first was I come through here and I sort of made me a raised bed by working from the sides here. And I hadn't quite finished yet, but I'll work from the sides here and pull the soil up into a raised bed on top right here. Once I get this raised bed up, crowned a little bit, and I've sort of chosen this width right here. You normally want to make your raised beds to where you can reach them easily from one side to the other. This particular works for the space that I've got right here. And then you make a little bit of a crown towards your center and smooth it out a little bit, because what I'm going to do next on this one is I'm going to put down irrigation tape, and then I'll put down plastic. The irrigation tape is, this product right here is actually T-tape. T-tape or Robert's Road Drip is available, or you can use, on a small scale, you could easily use soaker hoses. You can't use soaker hoses on a very large area because you won't have enough water to get through them, you won't have enough water pressure. But on a small area, that's still fine to use soaker hoses. But this is basically where water will drip out of this tape every few 8 inches in this case. Every 8 inches, there's like a leaky faucet here that just sort of drip, drip, drip. and the tape will go down the center of the bed once I get the bed made. Raised bed like this, of course here I've got the greenhouse structure over top, so I'm not expecting too much water, but in outdoors you sometimes get too much water. This will give you better drainage, give you a little bit better oxygen around your roots, and won't run into near as much of a problem with that drainage from a raised bed. It also sort of allows you to concentrate your effort in one area instead of working over the entire area. Now, the other thing I've done here with this raised bed is I've added lime, I've added wood ashes, and I've added some fertilizer. Let me just mention the fertilizer that I used here. This was actually some that people were throwing away, and I was able to get it. It's the reason I used it, but I had one that was called Winterizer, got one that's called Starter, got one that's called Rose Food, and one that's called Citrus Food. And all those are marketing terms. None of those are really important. Basically what you're using is you get nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Your first number is nitrogen, then phosphorus and potassium. Of course, I got plenty of potassium from my wood ashes. My wood ashes would have been like 0.16 or so there. So I've got some phosphorus, some potassium, and some nitrogen from any of these fertilizers. So don't worry about using fertilizers that may have a little bit different name on them. I saw one time a guy that would not buy a lawn fertilizer because it had lawns and he wanted tomatoes. Well, basically the only difference was they'd colored one of them red and they'd colored the other one blue. So it was the same product, and you could use it like that. The main thing, you don't want to use anything that's got herbicides in it, obviously, for a garden, but beyond that, you can use fertilizer from different ways. The critical thing is to get the right amount. You want about 1 pound of actual nitrogen per 1,000 square foot to start with, and then you can come back and side dress, or in the case where you got slow release nitrogen, you can actually put a little bit more nitrogen down to begin with before you plant your tomato plants. And then you would also want lime before we plant any of the plants we use in the garden, with the exception of potatoes. So here I've got my bed, I've got it crowned up, and the next thing I would do is I would put the drip tape down the center, and then the final thing I would do is once I have my drip tape hooked up, I'd come back with plastic. This is about a 4 mil plastic that you would buy in local stores, and this I expect to last for several years. It's a little bit thicker than the mulch. You can buy just plain mulch, but it won't last quite as much as the 4 mil black plastic will, and I will be using black plastic in this application here. And the black plastic will actually go both over the rows and between the rows. So between the rows, outdoors, you'd have to put a little bit of drainage in between here by, wherever you had a hole, you'd put a little bit of a hole in there in the plastic to give you a little bit of drainage. So basically, this system here, you don't have to worry about weed control because your plastic mulch holds the weeds down. I would come through my plastic mulch, just make a hole here, and then plant through that. I might have to pull a few weeds up right around the plant, but basically in between, I'm not doing a lot of weeding. And this is a little bit more costly method to get started, but on an area like this, you can really produce a lot of food for a home vegetable garden. Let me show you a couple of other techniques now. These collards here, last year again we had the drought situation and they didn't get near the water, and so they look a little bit pitiful in some ways, but at least I do have some collards here in this particular garden. This is very similar to what I did inside the cold frame. I have this raised bed right here. You can see the raised bed. And then I used a landscape fabric that's a little bit tougher plant. And this landscape fabric here, this has actually been down close to 10 years now. And the irrigation tape is underneath it here. So when I get ready to, right here's the irrigation tape. So it's already in place. When I get ready this spring to go in here and plant, I will take some compost, and I've got to put compost. Some years I'll come through and put lime in here, but I'll put compost into the hole right here, and then I can plant a plant right through this hole right here into the ground. And so I don't have to get equipment in here. I haven't had any equipment in here in several years, and I have a pretty good situation with weed control right here. I've got my irrigation right here. So I just got to work on my fertility by getting some compost into the hole, and then my fertilizer, whatever fertilizer I intend to use out here would be what I need to do to make this work right here. Let's take a look at a more traditional style over here now. This is a little bit more traditional. What people will do is, again, you can either hire somebody to break up an area for you, or you can rent a rototiller or something like that to break up an area, or get you a tiller that will work on an area about this size right here. But once it's broke up the first time, at the beginning of the year, then you can go that crop cycle without having to use power tools in it again if you wanted to. Here for fertility, I've added the wood ashes, I've added the lime already. I haven't been able to add a lot of compost out here. It's just too extensive to do that. I've turned under last year's crop, and so we'll grow whatever's growing last year. We'll turn it under, we'll disc, and get it ready to go in the spring of the year. And then we'll come in here and some method we'll lay off rows. There is equipment that will do that. I don't have it, so I just sort of use a guide and just go down through there to make either a row or where I put the plants in. Once I've planted the plants here, they come up. I will use this particular tool right here for cultivation. This tool will work on an area about this size or maybe twice this size right here if you work with it. This is what they call a wheel cultivator. And basically you want to come down through here and just scratch up like this. You've got to catch the plants when they're at what we call the white thread stage. In other words, you've got just a few leaves on top and you've sort of got a white thread for a root as opposed to a regular root system that's going to drop down in the soil and re-root. But if you'll just walk through, it's a little bit too wet to get out of here real well now, but just walking through like this, we'll drag these weeds out of the ground, and that'll give you weed control. And then you can follow through with the hand held hoe and keep the weeds out of an area like this, pretty much right here. For a home vegetable garden, I don't see there's a real need to use a lot of herbicides for your average weeds. There may be a few noxious weeds that you would need to use a herbicide for some way, but for the most part, you can cultivate the weeds. You can use lime and fertilizer that you can purchase for most of it. If you can turn it under some organic matter, turn it under some compost, that will benefit your soil quite a bit, but you should be able to have a good garden like that. If you have any questions about gardening, just give me a call at the office. And until next time, plan and plant for a better world.